Yo, what's up, everyone? My name is Jesse Haug, and I'm a film composer who will die poor because I take all of the money that people give me to write music for their films and I just spend it on live musicians. But in all seriousness, that's the question I'm trying to ask today. Are live musicians worth it? Okay, this is a question that's honestly kind of an important one to ask because if you think about it, you get paid for creating a score for a film. And that can include spending quite a bit of money, right? Because if you need to get your score mixed, if you need to hire some help to, get the best programming or orchestration, if you need to hire musicians to actually record on your score, what could look like a decent sum of money actually gets small pretty fast if you're going to be spending a lot of it. So you really need to think about the way that you're going to spend money when you're creating a score. And for me anyway, the fastest way to spend all my money is on live musicians. So it's important to ask, what does that actually bring? What does that do? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just keep all your money and, use samples because samples sound pretty good? That's a perfectly valid point, but today I'd like to try to answer that question, why I think, depending on the circumstance, live musicians actually are worth it. And there are 4 reasons, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to use the example of a score that I just finished earlier this year for a podcast called Tales of the Echowood, and how I used a quartet on the final episode of that series and why I think that they were worth it. And those 4 things are vibe, possibility, humanity, and spontaneity. We'll go through each one and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so the first one, vibe. This might be kind of obvious, but I think that it's worth talking about. The reality is, these sample libraries that we use have a sound because they were recorded by certain musicians in a certain room with certain engineers. They were mixed by certain engineers. They were packaged a certain way. So if you record different musicians in a different room with a different engineer, it's just going to sound different. And it doesn't really matter at that point if it's better or worse. What matters is, does it fit the vibe that you're going for? I'm going to show you what I'm talking about with this cue from the show. All right, so we're talking about vibe. This cue is one that I wanted to kind of have like a sort of creepy vibe here at the end with, a nice low register violin melody playing the main theme for one of the characters, and then the other strings just sort of adding texture around that. And let me show you what I came up with using the samples. So it's vibey, it's cool, but it doesn't have I always talk about this. There's like that last 5% is the hardest thing to get, right? Because you can write interesting music, you can orchestrate it interestingly, but just that last 5% to get it to 100% cool is always the hardest thing to do. And that's where live performers come in. It's not that it's different notes. It's just that the vibe is different. It's a different sound. It's a different room. There's more presence. All that like soul pont stuff and scratchiness and closeness and sparkle and excitement in the high end, and just the room and the scratchiness of those violins and stuff, it just brings more of a vibe than the samples had. That's sort of a little bit about how live players can bring vibe to your score. Okay, thanks, other Jesse. The second thing is possibility. This one's also kind of obvious, but maybe one of the more compelling reasons to use live musicians. At the end of the day, sample libraries can do certain things really, really well. Specifically, if we're talking about strings, which we are here, long sustains, staccatos, things like that, it does pretty well. It gets a little dicey once you start getting into legatos, and especially dicey when you want to do something like, let's say, double stops or more like fiddle style string playing. And that's exactly what I did on a cue from the show, and this shows the power that you have when you're working with live musicians, because all I did was give, Phil Glenn was the guy who did the solo on the show. All I did was give him a melody, and he did something that I've never heard a sample library do well. So let's go check that out. So this next one is the thing that makes me come back to live performers time and time again. And it's just the possibility, the things that they can do that you just cannot do in the box. And this is a great example of that. This cue was a melody that was referencing a song that we had in the show in a sort of musical episode that had happened in the past. And this song was like about the creation of the world. And so I basically wanted this cue to sound like, as they talk about the world being created, that you have like a tavern, maybe fiddle player who's sort of playing this ancient melody, something, everyone would know. It's sort of like a folk song for this culture. And I knew I kind of, I wanted like the double stop, sort of like a European, like Hardinger fiddle type deal. And here's what I just wrote out the melody in a sample violin, and here's kind of what that sounded like. Again, it's cool, it works, but that's very like orchestra, right? And I wanted more like folksy kind of sound. And just look at what my boy Phil did. I mean, if this doesn't make you book a violinist on your next film, I don't know what will. I rest my case. Awesome. The third thing is humanity. And I think this is the thing that gets talked about the most, but it's the hardest to talk about because it's the most ambiguous. What does it mean that live musicians bring humanity and emotion to the music? It's so abstract, it's kind of hard to nail down. I think I have a decent example for you though. This cue was one that I knew from the beginning needed to be full of humanity and emotion. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I was able to do that with the quartet and why it kind of would have been impossible to reach that level of humanity without them and exactly what that means. So I'm going to send it back over to other Jesse. So before we even made this episode, we knew that this was going to be a special musical moment in the show. It's actually the only moment in the show where the music wasn't underscore but was actually featured as like the main thing going on, and so we knew that we wanted it to be special, and we knew that we were recording a string quartet, so we thought, why not just feature them, just have it just be them, no extra samples, no extra instruments, just the string quartet. And then I thought, let's take it a step further. We won't do tempo, we'll just leave it completely free. We'll let the soloist Hector play the melody the way that he feels emotionally led to, and we'll just let the room breathe and be as it's going to be for this moment. And I'm so proud of what we were able to do, and it's crazy listening back to the samples actually, because it's just so different than what we ended up with. This is what I wrote, at least a section of it. I mean, it's like so much faster than it ended up being. It like feels cheap in comparison. And when we're talking about humanity, I guess that's what we're talking about, is like, how do you get rid of like the cheap, the cheesy, and really somehow get something real? And I think this performance shows how live performers make that happen. So give this a watch. if that doesn't show what I mean by humanity, I'm really not sure what will. It's hard to define, it's hard to describe exactly why that's the case, aside from maybe just the fact that these are people with past emotional experiences, real lived moments in their life, and when they perform, they bring all of that to the table. So what you get is you get a performance that's emotional because it's played by humans who have felt the same emotions that you have, and you just can't replicate that with samples, at least in my opinion. I haven't been able to. And that's one of the things that I just love about working with live musicians so much is, you know, every musical cue that you write, you want to have an emotional impact. You want to bring something to the table. You want it to elevate the story in some way. And that takes a lot of work, honestly. And you can sit and you can program forever and you can get close to that. But when you bring real people into the room, they get you there, and they get you there in a special way. And that's why I think live performers bring humanity, and why I keep going back to them. Let's check out the last thing. Sweet. Okay, this last one is maybe my favorite of the four, and it's spontaneity. I grew up playing in bands. That was sort of like my musical upbringing, was a group of, you know, a bunch of guys sitting around together in a room and trying to create music. It wasn't conceiving of things beforehand or writing out parts for people to play, but it was actually sitting in a room with them and in real time trying to form texture and melody and harmony and manifest that and bring that out in the songs. And so that's one of my favorite things about working with live musicians, is that you actually get to have that sort of spontaneity and creativity in the session as you're recording. And we did that on the final track of the show, one of my favorite tracks, called Not So Dark Yet, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how we did that. So let's go check that out. This is prettier than scary. Think like ethereal. Like kind of the vocals you've been hearing, think like that sort of thing. I'm going to wash this out in reverb, and it's just going to be like a wash of sound. So don't do lots of noticeable things, just keep it really sparse, long bow changes, little moments of kind of things, but keep it moving. It should always be moving, okay?
But kind of move between the notes, not...
Yeah, you can do both at the same time, but kind of like a slow move between the two. Yeah, so see how he has little moments of things. And if someone else is having a moment, don't do a moment there. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Okay. And we'll wash it out. Sweet. Well, hopefully after seeing all that, whether you think it's better or worse than the original sample versions, the thing that you can admit is that it's different. And sometimes different is enough. You know, the most exciting thing to me is having sounds and performances that no one else in the world has. No one else has put together these specific four performers and had them play these specific notes in the specific order. And to me, that's just so exciting, because how can I as a composer bring a unique and interesting experience to the director, to the audience, to the people listening to the music, to the performances on the screen, or in this case in the audio drama. And I just think that live musicians do that in such a unique and special way. I love sample libraries. I use them all the time. Sometimes they're the absolute best thing for the job. But the reality is, everyone else has them too, and that's okay, and you can still do interesting things with them. But it does a little bit of the work for you if you can have some live musicians, you know, break that ground between something that everyone has and something that no one has, and that's just really exciting for me. Not to mention, and you know, I joked at the beginning about spending all my money on this stuff, I also just love supporting musicians, and it's something that I have always done through beginning composing, and something that I hope to continue to do throughout my career. Is I would love to continue to see a robust musician community of people who are getting paid to perform, who bring the magic that only they can bring, and that we as composers can actually help sustain and enliven that community. So anyway, I'll get off my box, but that's why I think live musicians are entirely worth it. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down in the comments. I'll have more videos like this and others, some behind the scenes stuff coming up soon, and I'd love to just show you more about what I'm doing. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, like the video, subscribe, because I do have more coming, like I said, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Peace. Nah, man. Anyone can put black notes on a page.